Hi everyone, delonewolf here and welcome back to EVE Talk, your weekly look at the market in EVE Online. And this is the EVE Talk before the December release, you could say. On December 10th, CCP is going to come out with 3 features mostly, perhaps some other small stuff as well. But we've got kicking over castles from Team Talos, so a bit of a rebalance of the structure defensibility. They're being pretty careful on that one. I don't think that they're taking too big steps, but it's good that they are actually looking at structures, trying to bring them in line basically, and without necessarily scaring new players, tiny corporation and things like that right back to the NPC stations. We're also going to get the wallet revamp and the Hypernet relay, so we've got some good stuff, some balanced stuff, and then some controversial stuff. We'll see how all of that works out. Of course, I'm definitely planning to spend a little bit of time right here in Jita on release. I am curious to see how local is going to explode with the Hypernet relay offers, but personally I'm not planning to risk a lot on gambling, and that is not in my nature. As always, we'll take a quick look at the new Eden store as well. We have no sales. We do have the Zento Isideko skin, so a yellow skin that's considered hot. We've got some more yellow skins down here as well. Yeah, more Zento Isideko, and then all of them are. Yep, Zento. So we get a little bit of yellow fever right here. Lots of yellow. I don't like it on all of them. Too much yellow is not my thing. If it's balanced out with a little bit of black, then I kind of like him. What I do notice here is down here you get some black skins as well. Serpentis, for instance, pretty damn cool. And all of them are going for like 55 ISK. Yeah, make that conversion. I think that's pretty reasonable for some of the really cool skins, to be honest. So 55 is plex, excuse me, not ISK. Yeah, that's definitely okay. Look at this steel cardinal skin on a Drake or the Nighthawk. I feel like that is pretty cool as well. So yeah, there's some pretty cool skins, I think, for sale for 55 plex, which is pretty reasonable in my opinion, if you find your favorite ones. Like the Osprey Navy issue here, I feel like that's alright. Then look at the Rook, that's the Falcon, that's too much white in there, not enough black in there for my personal taste. But yeah, the yellow Zento Isideko skins is front and center this week. No special sales to report. So that means we can move on to the market. That's of course why everyone is here. And as always, we're gonna start with some plex and stuff at 250. Like that. Let's take a look at plex, and in Jita we are back above 3.5 million for the sellers. The buyers though are below 3.3 million, so a bit of margin opening up. That's in my opinion more signs of hesitation. These sellers in the player owned trade hubs go down to just above 3.3 million ISK. Yeah, you can definitely see the difference there. And then the buyers probably stick around the same range, exactly 3.25 million for the buyers. That's a very narrow margin. This is a bit more of a margin opening up, so the average price might be up a little bit. Yeah, we're basically bouncing off the 3.25 million mark. You can again see the sales. This did a 15% sale for Black Friday, I think, on plex, and they also, because you can clearly see that the volumes went a little bit crazy for 4 days, which is quite a bit longer than what normally happens on CCP sales, because CCP also took out the taxes for trading plex, and so everyone got an amazing chance to take their positions close to 3.25 million. We're bouncing off of that, but if we look at those margins between the player-owned trade hubs and the buyer market itself, it's very, very narrow. So I'm still seeing hesitation for plex to start to rise again. I think we'll really have to wait for like maybe some more concrete announcements or some really cool stuff to drop when it comes to EVE Online. Perhaps just announcements for FanFest, for instance, before we get some real hype building. Something else that could change this dynamic substantially would be a massive war in 0-0, but I personally have not really heard about that happening anytime soon. So right now we're at pretty low plex prices, but keep in mind that I'm seeing hesitation here as well. For the multiple pilot training certificate, prices are going above 1.5 billion now, almost 1.6 for the sellers. In JITA, in fact, except for one seller, we're way above 1.6 billion, and the buyers are now forced up to above 1.5 as well, bring the average price up here in a pretty substantial move after a slight downtrend, which created basically our best opportunity at 1.35 billion. So this is a first sign that potentially plex might start to go back up, because at least for the training certificates it seems to be the case. Let's take a look at the skill extractors to get another feeling. Yeah, here we can pretty clearly, right at the tail end, you get a downwards trend again for the 5-day moving average. So we have some clear hesitation here as well at pretty low prices, just above the 380 mark on the chart, and just one jump out, sellers are below 380 million, buyers are at 370. In JITA, sellers are at almost 400 million. Look at that difference, look at that pressure clearly coming from the player owned trade hubs. This is pretty damn massive, and perhaps something that could have happened, we'll have to look at that, is that players took the chance to just trade a lot in JITA when it was like tax free for the plex market, but that they've also decided to move a lot of their business to the Tranquility Trade Tower, mostly, as you can tell right here, in order to take advantage of lower taxes. On the other hand, look at the volumes here. They are definitely, well, actually they're pretty much in line, and that's a lot of domination here by the Tranquility Trade Tower. And in JITA, I'm not seeing the hundreds or anything like that. So this is not even that crazy in the volumes. Basically, for this segment, it really looks like the Tranquility Trade Tower is taking over a lot of business. For the skill injectors next, we'll start with the large ones. These are rising substantially, clearly a trend break here above 850 million is with a bottom range of 800 million. Just in November, I think our buy opportunities are now over 870 million for the first seller, 890 for most though, and then the buyers are up to 858 million. Clearly a chip up as well, as CCP stopped giving out free SP for the logins, for the daily skilling spree and things like that. So now I think that it is part of the equation, not too big a part of the equation, but definitely an aspect of it. If CCP restarts that for the holidays, for instance, there's definitely gifts coming for Christmas, at least I'm fully expecting those, but after that, if next year they're holding off on opening up the skill point faucets, then perhaps we'll see a pretty substantial rise in the large scale injectors, and this immediately shows you the advantage of investing in large scale injectors. You don't just have the defense against inflation, which comes from the plex component, basically the skill extractors that then become large scale injectors, but you also have the potential upswing due to demand for skill points. Here, another potential explanation, we do see an increased volume, is just a new dreadnought, a new Triglavian ship, new Triglavian skills, precursor skills to train, and some people want to be first, they want to get in that new Zenitra immediately, and so they just buy everything that they need for it. Yeah, if enough people in an alliance decide to go that route, that could mean increased demand like this. Next up, we have the small skill injector that is also clearly going up in price. Look at the increased volumes. Part of that could be investment as well. I fully think that that's possible. We were below 170 just last week, and now we're at almost 180 million for the sellers and 172 for the buyers. I think this is pretty important. Buyers are forced up by the market to a much higher price range. And finally, we have the daily alpha injector that is continuing to stay really low, below 40 million ISK here. Less than that for the sellers, 36 million for the buyers. It's basically a pretty big sale period. You can see all the volumes here, people taking their positions at bottom prices. I still think that you can try to grab some really cheap daily alpha injectors and hope for a return of like around 50%. In my opinion, yeah, 40 million, 60 has to be possible, 70 at the highs. Yeah, for a lot of the others, I think you're pretty much too late. Plex could still be possible, right? You could still buy some Plex and maybe some skill extractors as well. But right now, skill injectors are up, multiple pirate training certificates are clearly going up as well, and the small skill injectors. I would be very fast if you still want to take your positions in the Plex stuff markets. Next up, we're moving on to the mineral market, coming in at, let's say 10 minutes. That gives me a couple more seconds, and as always we will start with titanium, that is trying to hold on to a price of more than 5 ISK, and it's at this point successfully doing so. So I would say that that's still decent news. It's not a great price, but it's still a respectable price for titanium, which is pretty damn easy to get. 523 for the sellers in Jita, and the buyers are still just above 5 ISK, so there is a little bit of demand that is keeping titanium from crashing back down to that. I think that's pretty good news, but we also see that the peaks are very quickly going down, so the volatility is gone. And then of course the big threat is that stuff like this, 1.6 billion, 2 billion, yeah, that oversupply does take over, breaks through the 5 ISK barrier, and then we start to move at that low new normal. It is entirely possible. Let's take a look at the rest of the market. Here is pyrite, alright, actually climbing back above 5 ISK, pretty close to 1-year high point. Not bad, 520 for the sellers, 489 for the buyers. That is a very good 1-year performance here for pyrite. Still, historically speaking, a terrible price, but at least we can see that the market still works here. We actually have a mineral that took a massive beating. This stuff used to be worth a lot more than titanium, but that is finally able to recover, as I think people just leave it to the wayside, completely ignore pyrite at the moment. Or basically have been ignoring it for a long time, causing demand to catch up to it and the prices to rise. Next up we have Mexalon. That one was languishing at a 1-year low point and is still doing so, heading back towards 40 ISK at this point. 42 for the sellers, 39.65 for the buyers. This is even historically speaking a pretty bad price, but keep one thing in mind, that 60 ISK range was the one mineral pretty much that managed to defend its price range from before any of the change that CCP has made, which has caused a major crash in Tech 1 minerals, Tech 1 ship prices, which has been going on for several years. So here, this was basically, in my opinion, oops, and we're meant to keep you centered here. This was basically, in my opinion, something that rebalanced. You can really see that here in the summer months with the nullsec blackout. That basically, I think, was a trigger to look into moon mining a little bit more for nullsec, because they could defend those moons more effectively than bells. And as a result, it gave them the opportunity to change their mix-up when it comes to the moons that they mined, and they added some Mexalon and some Noxium, some of the few minerals that defended their price ranges better. So next up we've got Isogen. That one is continuing to do very badly, dive below 12.5 ISK, jumps back up to 13.5 probably, but still a very low point. 13 ISK for the sellers, 12 ISK for the buyers. The most the lowest, I would say, mineral compared to the prices before all of the changes that I just talked about. The biggest victim. Basically, it's so abundant now and you hardly need it in your mix. You need less Isogen than you need Mexalon in most builds, and yet Mexalon is still going for 40 ISK, being at a 1-year low point, and Isogen is going for about a fourth that price, while you usually need less of it than you need Mexalon on a blueprint. So this is a complete crazy situation, of course, but it is part of history at this point. Then we get Noxium, the other one that I was talking about, and this one is not able to defend its range. Is actually going towards 200 ISK at this point. We're talking 218 for the sellers and 204 for the buyers. Yeah, Noxium still had a leg down to go. We could clearly see that I was struggling here in those 10 days when it was trying to break 225. It just wasn't bouncing up off that, and so that straight downward trend broke through the 225 barrier, and now looks like it will landing at 200 disc. Another one of those that has that same pattern as Mixlon. Can clearly see that the trend break happened during and or right after the no, August was still blackout, and I think it's the same story here, that we just have moon mining that you know, is safer, and you can decide on your own mix, thus resulting in less needed Noxium from outside for a lot of the Gnostic empires. After that, we have Zydrine that is alright, successfully defending the 450 to 500 range. Bit of a surprise that it's able to do so. 490 for the sellers, 454 for the buyers. The reason why I'm so surprised that it is able to defend this range is because Megasite is continuing its decline, despite the fact that you could normally do the same thing as what I was talking about with Mixlon and Noxium. You could switch your moons a little bit to make more Zydrine, because you're getting more risk out of that than Megasite, but I guess that is in the end a rather bulky process which needs a real incentive like the Nullsec blackout to actually make that happen. And so here Megasite continuing its slide down, heading for 300 disc at this point, 333 for the sellers and 318 for the buyers. A lot lower than Zydrine. If it was very easy, just a matter of maybe onlining certain moons, then I think if people had a quick switch from Megasite to Zydrine, they would do so at this point, but it may just be something that is not that easy to do either. And finally, we've got Morphite left, that is still way above 10,000 discs, so still at a really good price. Of course, Morphite is different, tied to that Tech 2 production cycle rather than the Tech 1 production cycle, going for 11,750 is still a very, very good price. 10,800 for the buyers, way above 10k, still way above average basically right now. Yeah, still in a sell opportunity if you bought in the first half of the year for around 7,500 disc. Look at that chart, that's actually so full of potential, but it constantly feels so risky when you've got a downtrend going before this chart, and then you see we're still languishing. We should be buying, but that becomes very scary because of all of the months spent at this range, but then it does eventually happen. This is a sandbox economy, returns and comebacks are real, and here we had that massive increase in price all of a sudden, also during the blackouts months, up to 12,500 disc, and yeah, it's been able to defend that range very easily so far. Next up, the PI markets coming in at 1715. Let's go over these. The feeling here has been that we have too little demand for the current PI production, so lots of goods are struggling to a less than average price. We can see the broadcast nodes in the last couple of months clearly going back below 2 million ISK. So this is one example of that. And look at the supply. It's not that much, but it is definitely coming in the player owned trade hubs. That doesn't, yeah, it's really dominating the plex stuff, but not the other markets. Less than 2 million though for the sellers, 1.8 million for the buyers. Broadcast nodes below average. Again, it's that same gamble, although I would clearly wait for some of these real low points at like 175 million. If you had a chance to buy those, that's what I would wait for. But the gamble in these advanced PI materials is, of course, will CCP eventually come out with more new structures? They're still talking about like a structure for Nullsec Intel, Nullsec Local, things like that. I think it's still on the books right now. Of course, the focus from CCP is on the new player experience, and so we need a bit of a switch in direction for that to happen. But perhaps FanFest can be yeah, potentially one of those bombshell announcements for a new structures, and that is where slow investments in these advanced PI materials could yield massive returns. It remains a gamble though, but right now, of course, with all of that pressure on the prices, is the time to keep an eye out for good deals. Construction blocks are still struggling, staying below 10,000 discs, trying to get above that on a couple of occasions, so the 5-day moving average is slowly moving up. Just above 10,000 for the sellers, 9,000 for the buyers, still below average though. we should get back to that 11k for the average price. So that's not happening right now. Consumer electronics, same thing, struggling, going back up, right, getting towards that 12,000 disc, but I'd need to see 12.5 for the average price. We're talking 11,500 and 12,200 for most sellers, 10,800 and 300 for the buyers. That is still a massive margin below average. So same situation. Coolants was starting to give back some of the gains. A nice double peak in October and November up to 14,000 disc, which is really great. We're basically back at 12k, which is a normal price, even slightly above average, with 12,500, 11,000 for the buyers. This is the fuel related PI materials, at least some of them are still doing very well, such as the coolants. 12,500 is clearly still above average. Cryo protectant solutions, the new item, still very, very expensive, of course, tied to the new triglavian or precursor mimesis implant set. We'll keep an eye on that, see for how long this can defend that. I think this could basically be a bit of a canary in the coal mine for when your DLP value is going to start to drop, for when the implants could become more available, cheaper to use as well. So we'll definitely keep that here. It's a very good suggestion. Right now though, you're paying 150,000 discs for the sellers, 132,000 for the buyers. Well, there's a third element to that. It's not just the value of the DLP and the supply of these implants catching up to demand. There's of course also a move from other PI materials to cryoprotected solutions that could drive the price back down. So that dynamic is going to be pretty interesting. It is only one good though, so I don't think it'll have an impact on the rest of the PI market. Enriched uranium, below average, struggling around 13,000 disc. Sellers though trying to get back to 14k, but look at those buyers, 12,700, opening up pretty big margin, showing that lack of demand, despite the fact that sellers are getting pretty close to the average. The average prices are clearly below that. Integrity response drones continuing the decline as well, below 2.25 million. If we get below 2.1 on the buyers, which we don't just yet, that would be interesting. Even this, 2.14, look at 2.15 is right here. It's not a bad place to buy, to be honest. 2.3 million for the sellers, below average, obviously. Mechanical parts also starting to trade below average, trying to get back to that 11k, not really succeeding in that. Just below 11,000 for the sellers, less than 10,000 for the buyers. Trading below average. Organic mortar applicators, it becomes of course a one-sided story when the trend does start to show itself throughout the entire market and starts to hold up. So 1 million should be above 1 million should be an average price. We're talking sellers just above 1 million, buyers a bit below that. So I'm surprised by this narrow margin, but we are trading right around the 1 million when 105 is closer to the average, and sometimes even selling the buyers actually win out here. So you're grabbing organic mortar applicators below a million is below average for sure. It's not yet the crash towards 900k, but it could definitely happen if the trend continues. Robotics was struggling as well and is actually still doing so. 91,000 for the sellers, 86,500 for the buyers. This is very, very cheap. This potentially could be a good investment. One thing to keep in mind is that despite the peak here in July, this is only a peak from 95,000 to 110,000 disc. It is not very volatile, so you're not gonna get like a 50% or a 100% return on something like robotics. This is just a small investment that you could make, in my opinion, because it is tied to fuels, and fuels at some point will, in my opinion, potentially make a nice comeback. So something to consider, I would say. Self-harmonizing power cores, the trend in advanced PI materials tied to structures continues at around 1.9 million, way below average. Just below 2 million for the sellers, below 1.9 million by as much for the buyers. Superconductors next, that one crashed to a 1-year low point, and then we do see the volumes come in, investors taking their positions. I don't blame you. I personally didn't do that because I produce superconductors myself. This just means that I'm holding off from selling, but good to see the bounce back on an opportunity like that. It shows that people do have an eye on these markets. 11,500 disc for the sellers, 10,000 disc for the buyers, though that's still a pretty big margin. So the pressure is on. I don't think that it'll be too long before we dive back to a less than average price, unfortunately. Test cultures after that, the one exception you could say that started at 11,000 disc or 10,000 disc, went down to 6,000 disc, and I was really hesitant to make a move in all of these months, to my own detriment, unfortunately, because we should have. It's back to 13,500 disc on a lack of supply, 8,800 disc for the buyers. Massive opportunity, close to 1 year high point, no, 13k at a 1 year high point. Yeah, sell your test cultures if you bought them like during the Norsec blackout or just before that for 6 to 7,000 disc. You are getting a 100% return, which is something that can happen when they crash down to crazy lows, which is something completely different in my opinion from that robotics chart. So you've got a buyer in my opinion, but don't expect a 100% return. And you've got test cultures where right now, if you invested at the right time, if you had the balls to invest when it looked really bleak, you got a 100% return right now. And finally, we get Whitware mainframes that is actually managing to defend that 2.1 million range pretty well. 2.2 million for the sellers and less than 2 million for the buyers. It's a bit of a margin opening up, showing that lack of demand, but Whitware mainframes is actually on the seller side defending its price really strongly. Which means that we get to move on to the advanced moon materials, coming in at 25.50. Like that. And let's see, last week we had basically some exceptions, but most of them were under pressure. Crystalline carbonite was one of those exceptions, actually went to an above average price, has to pay the price at this point. It goes back down, 153 for the sellers, 143 for the buyers. It's still not that bad, but it's clearly heading below average. Ferrite carbide was clearly struggling, slight move up, but yeah, just bouncing off of the 120 low point, 125 for the sellers, 120 for the buyers, and you can clearly see that some investors took opportunities as well in ferrite carbide at this point. So it does look like the 120 range will be strongly defended by the market. If we go below that, excuse me, there's people ready to snag that up. After that, we have our titanium carbide, which was also struggling. Again, 1 year low point, now flat at the current range, which is 168 for the sellers and 160 for the buyers. You get some defense here, you get some investments as well, but clearly struggling at the low point. And then tungsten carbide, same thing, actually dove to 1 year low point. Look at the volume response, but we are very shyly heading back for 178 for the sellers and 163 for the buyers. Lots and lots of low points, lots of pressure, too much supply, basically a too stable a Norsec in my own opinion, and as a result these are going for really low prices. Same thing as with plex, same thing as with Tech 2 ships in my opinion. If you wanna invest on a potential return when something massive breaks out in Norsec, this is of course the market to look at, and you're not the only one, but know that the investors here are very, very careful. They're really only skimming off or basically grabbing the very bottom bargains. They're not pushing this price back towards 200 or anything like that. It's really very narrow buying that's happening there if you look at these charts. Next up, we've got the metamaterials. Photonic metamaterials managing to defend 17,500 discs pretty well. 17.7 for the sellers, 16.4 for the buyers though, so be careful. That lack of demand again showing up, or that oversupply clearly showing up here as well. Still at an average price, but the bottom, basically the buyers here are opening up that margin, so this could turn around at any time. And of course then the carbide items are starting to show that pressure should show up at some point. And here it is, plasmonic metamaterials was defending 22,500 disc really well up until next week, above average price, but that doesn't hold up now. We're talking 20,600 for the sellers, 19,000 for the buyers. Look at that margin that opens up here, kind of crazy, and that is going to start to drag everything else down as well, in my opinion. Non-linear metamaterials was already a little bit below average. 23,400 for the sellers, 22,000 for the buyers. Not as bad a margin, but of course, if it was at 27k, then you would probably see that margins drag the price down as well. And then we've got terahertz metamaterials that has some volatility after reaching a 1-year low point of less than 20,000 disc. Shot back up here on some volumes, nothing too crazy. Again, the investors in these are very careful, basically just bumping it right back to above 20,000 disc. People are willing to wait and see. Finally a second bump back towards the average, but to no avail. That doesn't last very long. 22,900 for the sellers, less than 20,000 for the buyers. Still, yeah, it shows there's too much supply, not enough demand. Buyers are still right here and they are not moving at all. For the other goods, we've got fermionic condensates that is back under pressure after reaching 90,000 disc again. So now we're already back down to 85,000 for the sellers, 83,000 for the buyers. Below average. Ferrogel, 1-year low point. 1-year low point first plateau, second one, and now the third one. So this is why, in my opinion, the investors are so careful. You never know when another leg down is gonna form. So you've got the first one to 1-year low point, 40,500, the historical one. A second leg down to 40k, and now we've got a third leg down, and we're talking 34,000 for the sellers, 32,000 for the buyers. Yeah, this is a crazy situation. It doesn't happen very often, right? That this average for the year gets broken through in several stages, but here for the first time, a clear complete break with what was happening before on the chart. 32,000, super low here for Ferrogel. So that gives me the 1 hour warning. Fuller rights flat at 2,000 disc. That's actually doing all right? 1,000 for the sellers, 967 for the buyers. Super narrow margin at an average price. There are some exceptions, as I've said, but the trend I think is pretty obvious. Hypersynaptic fibers average 12,500, maybe even a bit above that. 11,700 for the sellers, 11,700 for the buyers. So on the other goods, there are narrower margins. The market doesn't seem to be willing to go too low on all of those. But clearly we have to be careful with either lack of demand or just too much stability and too much supply. Nano transistors, the strong summer and fall performer at 6,000 disc on a lack of supply. That has changed, but sellers are back up to 5,700. That's pretty interesting. Buyers though 4,700. They're having none of that. We'll see who wins out here in the end. Nano transistors trying to get a well above average sell price. Buyers though are right where you would expect them. So this is a fight that might actually be very determining for the entire category. We can clearly see the pressure, we can see the lack of demand, we can see the buyers saying, hell, we're not going anywhere to those average prices, we're staying right where we are. But here a first attempt at sellers really dictating that price and bringing it back up to almost 6,000 disc, which is of course really great. But who will win out here? That's the real question. Phenolic composites, and a first real trend break here on this one as well. Went down to 17.5, 1,750 ISK here, pretty close to 1 year low point, and all of a sudden back to 2,200 for the sellers, 2,000 for the buyers as well. All right, the first one where the buyers have been forced up as well, not even on that big of a volume spent. This one is clearly triggered the 2k to 2k push here, but a surprise, something completely counter to the other trend. Phenolic composites climbing from very close to 1 year low point to an above average price all of a sudden. We'll see how long it lasts though. Ceramic fibers finally struggling at the 350 range. Obviously below average, in fact close to a 1 year low point. Here we have that same pattern. Went to 300 disc, you've got investors, but look, they just move it to 350. They're saying, all right, we're grabbing this little puddle of 1 year low point, but that's it. We're not moving to the 400 or the 450 at all. This all we are investing in. Really important to note how careful the investors and the market is when it comes to these low points in advanced moon materials. Which means that we're moving on to the impact on the Tech 2 ships at 3350. And that should be a lot of pressure in my opinion, so not good news for my stealth bomber investments if that turns out to be true. The Ares is already starting to show that, right? Starts November at 27.5 million after reaching a low point, and we're just slowly heading back to that 25 million range. 26 million for the sellers, 24 million for the buyers. Very cheap, well below average, and look at that pressure on the price that keeps building up. Next up we have the Basilisk. Yeah, a little bit different on this one. On a volume increase we have a jump from 200 to 230 million, back on an average price. 242 for the sellers, 210 for the buyers. Buyers moved up a little bit as well. That is interesting. Not what I expected, but a bit of a Basilisk recovery here. So if you bought some of these at 180, you can now sell them for 240. You have a nice return already, which is of course what I'm personally looking for in those stick to ship markets, is decent turnarounds at a decent rate. Cerberus, alright, another one, right? You could have bought these for 200 million not that long ago. Look at the recovery here all of a sudden. Sellers at 300 million, yeah, that's a 50% profit right there. And buyers forced up to 267 as well. Very interesting. I did not expect this at all, especially with the advanced moon materials the way they are. But Cerberus, you can sell. Basilisk, you can sell. Here's the Crow next. Alright, so the interceptors are not making that move. You can see that slow burn down from 30 to 28 million ISK. We're talking 29 almost for the sellers, 26.5, and here we do have that lack of demand showing up. Then the Guardian, let's see, that one had a jump up to 250 last week, so you could have had, this is only like a 25% margin or markup, but you could have tried it, and then we're already right back down. 220 for the sellers, 195 for the buyers. Basically that seller's mark is already over. We're back to a below average price. Heretic, Interdictor, and going to again a 1 year low point of around 60 million on average. 55 million for the buyers, 64 million. Yeah, you've had plenty of time at this point, I would say, to invest in a Heretic, and you still can do so right now, really low. After that we get the Hound. Up, okay, yeah, a bit of a surprise here. Was struggling and was getting away from 25 million, and I need to sneeze in a moment, I think. Yeah, no, alright, we'll hold it in. So a bit of a jump up to an above 25 million range, 27 million for the sellers, 22.7 million for the buyers. And so here now my 22 million investment could yield a small return. I've got more patience than that, but good to see the recovery. At this point everything is above my investment, so I'm really happy with that personally. But it comes as a surprise. I thought the pressure would continue. Next up we've got the Ishtar, also pretty flat at a slightly above average price. 236 for the sellers, 220 for the buyers. It is a great ship though. You guys know that I love to explore in that one, and yeah, it's earned itself over many times in some of those good combat sites. Next up the Manticore. Let's see if the trend continues. Yep, jump up to 30 million ISK. A bit of pressure at the end right there, but we're talking 31 million for the sellers. 271 coming in here is gonna basically keep volatility in check. 22.5 million for the buyers. Still a very big margin here, but a potential sell opportunity of like 8 million in profit or something like that. We could consider it. I'm again gonna wait for something real to happen, but yeah, surprise for me, honestly, that the stealth bombers are jumping up all of a sudden. The Munin is continuing its slide. That is of course due to its nerf. Less than 200 million for the sellers, 185 for the buyers. 1 year low point. You could gamble on grabbing this, but know that this ship has been nerfed. It was like really the meta in Nosek, if I'm not mistaken, and as a result now this loss of value is not really a surprise, and it may not recover because of that. Then Nemesis, ooh man, look at that volume, look at that spike, that is very nice. 22.5 million as the offshoot. We're up to 29 million for the sellers, 23.5 for the buyers though, forced up by a bit above a million. 22 to 29, so it's already going back down on more supply, of course. That's not really that abnormal, but good news for my investment again. Next up here we get the Oneros also going up to a 1-year high point, 244 million for the sellers, 185 still for the buyers. So this is crazy, right? If you could trigger a buy order below 190 and then get a sell at 240, let's see if there's something happening. Nope, that's it. Then you've got a massive return on an immediate trade. So you could put up a buy order, and if you have an Oneros, you could put up a sell order, and you just have that 60 million ISK difference between the two. That's kind of crazy. Volume's up though, so someone did invest in quite a few Tech 2 Oneros logistics cruisers. Interesting, unexpected, very interesting in my book. Let's take a look at the Purifier. This is not really a trend break, slowly going back up from that low point. I bought this for 22 million. We're back at 30 million for the sellers, 25 million for the buyers. Very good news as well in this direction, but this is not a spike like the other stealth bombers. The Saber, yeah, bit of volatility here on these average prices. I think it's basically sellers, well, yeah, they went up to 70 plus. Right now we're back to 59 million for the sellers, 66 million for the buyers. Yeah, you can definitely try to grab a cheap Saber as well, just like a cheap Heretic, but in my opinion, you're gonna wait for either something really big to happen in Nosik or CCP to rebalance these ships, which could happen, right? Team Talos could be looking at that right now, who knows? But you've had plenty of opportunities to do so, in my opinion, so we're not gonna think too much on that. Then we get the Scimitar flat above 200 million, 200 for the sellers, 180 for the buyers. That's still pretty damn low. And then finally the Stiletto, very flat, just below 30 million ISK here. Decently narrow margin, actually 29 to 27 million on this one. Very interesting. Yeah, is something brewing? Well, the stealth bomber purchases and especially the logistics cruisers purchases that have been happening here are quite interesting. One thing to keep in mind though, the Oneros is really low in volumes, very easy to manipulate as well. So that is a potential reason for this increase in price as well. This leads us to the Tech 3 markets coming in at 4110. And that's going to be my brother on Steam, probably to discuss the next leak of Path of Exile. But we are going to finish Eve Talk first. So here is the Confessor. Let's take a look at that. Ooh, that tail end here, that 5-day moving average dipping below 35 million. That is not good news. We're talking 35.7 million for the sellers, 32 million for the buyers. And despite that, almost a full page of new Confessors coming in, 45, 36, 39, 35. That's still too much. We're still oversupplied, and I think that potentially this could be a little bit too much pressure here as well. So we could see even lower prices than that we see now. I would be very careful with investing in the Confessor right now. If you do, definitely go for the buy orders rather than the sell orders. Then we've got the Hecate. Yeah, did bottom out at 30, at less than 37 million ISK. Bit of a bump up here on that daily average. We're now talking 39 million for the sellers, 36 million for the buyers. Last 24 hours, bit less than half a page, 26.50 here, 18. It's still a lot for Hecates below 40 million ISK, but it's not as bad as the Confessor. Next up we have the Jackdaw, recovering back to 40 million ISK. That's interesting. Less than that for the sellers, 36 million for the buyers. We got 70 here though, 15, 20, 31. Last 24 hours, about half the page, which is like probably around 150 Jackdaws though. So it's not as bad, but it is still, in my opinion, slightly oversupplied. And then we have the Zwepel finally struggling below 35 million. Less than that for the sellers, exactly. Last 24 hours, again, half a page. 8 and 2s, this is much better for a Zwepel below 35 million. Buyers are at 33 million. I'm still very hesitant. This Confessor supply is a bit of a problem in my opinion, for one of the lowest ones. As low as the Zwepel, but should be more popular than that. On the other hand, I think the two most popular ones, the Hecate and the Jackdaw, are showing their first signs of slight recovery. So that's again, not a uniform picture anymore of just oversupply and everything is going down. Like here, October, I think we'll have that across the board. Confessor in October, look at that crash, and then the Zwepel, look at that October crash again as well. So we're not in that situation anymore, but I think that yeah, producers still want to eke out some profits, and so there is still that danger, I think, that more supply could come in, could stop these increases very quickly. I would be very careful when it comes to investing in these tech tree destroyers. And then let's take a look at the cruisers. The Legion is trying to maintain a price of around 150, 158 million for the sellers, 136 for the buyers. Nothing too crazy in the supplies, it's just not the meta. So here I'm gonna give that same warning again. Decently low prices, decently low volumes. Be careful for market manipulation. This could very easily happen. Loki tries to stay around 180, very similar pattern here. We're talking 180 for the sellers, 172 for the buyers, a bit better in supply, 24 hours next to nothing, but the 48 here is gonna keep things a bit more stable, 50 down here as well. That's better in supply, gonna be a bit trickier to manipulate the Loki market, but it is also the most popular tech tree cruiser at the moment. Then we get a Proteus flat at 150. Same price as the Legion. That feels kind of strange. 155 for the sellers, 140 million for the buyers. And again, look at the availability. It's definitely, in my opinion, going down. Not seeing big numbers. Some supply in the last 24 hours, but could very easily be manipulated. On the other hand, now the Proteus is the exact opposite of the Loki, the least popular strategic cruiser, so here those low volumes could be more normal. And then we've got the Tengu, which is slowly going up to 150 as well, 149 for the sellers, 135 for the buyers. Bit more supply, yeah, and a bit more availability as well. Pretty popular PvE platform, of course. Yeah, that Legion is kind of crazy. If you want to gamble on something like that happen again, it looks to me like it is primed to do so again, because the availability is really next to nothing. 158 for the sellers, 136 for the buyers. This could, on the purchase of just a couple dozen Legions, shoot up again to that 190 range. But then volumes tend to go down. Look at that decrease in price, and then look at the volumes go down here as well on most days. Very difficult, very risky, but it's basically primed for that again, far more than the other cruisers, which is a crazy situation. A below average Legion on next to no availability. We're there again. We were there right here at this bottom region as well. So be very careful, in my opinion, in the tech tree market. The destroyers are oversupplied, could get far more oversupply as well. And then these cruisers are hesitating, they're just not in the meta. And so the Legion, I think, might see some real manipulation pretty soon. The others, a bit trickier to do. Loki and Tengu are more popular platforms still, so that's going to be harder to do there. And that leaves us with the extra products. Take one battleships. There's someone that really loves the Hyperion, asked me to take a look at that, so we're going to do that. Coming in at 47.20. Like that. So that's going to be ships, battleships, standard battleships. That's been a really long time, but let's start with Amar. Here's the Abaddon, going for less than 150 million ISK, 142 in fact for the sellers, 135 for the buyers. So that's a bit of a dive as well that the chart still has to catch up to. We are trading around an average range for the Abaddon. I would say maybe a touch below average here at the 140s. And we had a strong summer, maybe with the blackout. Let's see if that's something that comes back. Here's the Apocalypse. Yep, strong summer, August, September, but we are back to a less than 130 range, 120 in fact for the sellers, 117. So now I think that the mineral pressure is starting to show back up here as well. Very strong performance during the blackout months and right after that. So that's an impact, I think, here that is going to start to show up in all these Tech 1 battleships. July, August, increase in price. Nosec blackout, yeah, the faucets of Rorquals were definitely being taken out there due to that, which caused an immediate impact on the Take One ship market. But we're right back to a below average price, I would say. 137 for the sellers, 105 for the buyers. Then we've got our Caldari battleships. Here's the Raven. Oh, look at that. Beautiful summer plateau, blackout plateau, whatever you want to call it, up to 150, and to right back to that 120, even below that, 126 for the sellers, but 106 for the buyers. We're back in the oversupply trade, unfortunately. Rock, actually a late bloomer here, August, September, up to 180, and now back down to a less than average price, unfortunately. 137, 111. Yeah, it's gonna be that same story again and again, I think. Scorpion, obviously the same plateau, back to less than average, back to very cheap, you could say as well, of course. And here is the requests. Here are the Galente ones, the Dominics. Look at that, August spike up to 180, went down to 130, actually recovering a little bit. 143 for the sellers, 127 for the buyers. 143 is not bad, it's actually a bit above average. Then we get our Hyperion. Ooh, that hurts. We do get a July spike, but it looks like it was not too popular to begin with, although it's up to 200 plus million. Then 180 for the summer, and now we get the crash back to 130, which we're just recovering from on some investments. 153 for the sellers, 113 for the Hyperion. Look at that margin. Yeah, unfortunately, right, buyers know that there's too much supply of minerals out there. They know that these are pretty damn cheap, so you've got that massive margin despite below average prices. And then yeah, we've got a strong summer. Here's the Megatron. Then try to recover back to 130, but we're right back below 120. 119 for the sellers, 107 for the buyers, well below average. And finally we get the Minotaur. They might be a little bit different because of the rebalancing. So these guys, July, Nostic blackout starts, no movement. Finally August, September it moves a little bit, and then here back down, and now back up at the tail end. Would that be due to the rapid fire? I don't know. 132 for the sellers, 111 for the buyers. Again, buyers really cheap. We get Tempest, August spike as well up to 180. Back down here, bit of a resurgence. Yeah, maybe. 125, it's also pretty cheap still. 125 for the sellers, 112 for the buyers. And finally we get the Typhoon chart, a bit more normal, you could say. July, right, the plateau up to 140 for a battleship, 140 million, that's really crazy. And I'm back down to less than 120, 119 for the sellers, 105, 100 million basically for buying a Typhoon. Really cheap. Very good suggestion, of course. The request was for the Hyperion specifically. Not good news there, of course. Just dipped to one low point of 130 million ISK. Commands a bit of a premium on most other battleships. Volumes though less than 50 are pretty low. Compare that to the Dominics, for instance. That is completely different. But the general trend in the Take One battleships, which we've discovered here thanks to this suggestion, is of course the immediate impact of the nullsec blackout on Take One ship battleship prices. At least we have a pretty nice plateau, 120 to the 150 range, yeah, about 20% probably in markup due to the nullsec blackout, and to right back down unfortunately after that. Or should we say unfortunately? Again, it is something that I think might be part of CCP's basic strategy. Keep Take One ships really cheap for alpha players, new players, so that they don't feel like they've got major losses or massive grinds to do in order to get in that battleship, to get in that battle cruiser, and then also lose it. It's not that big a deal. So that just may be the philosophy that CCP is working on at the moment. The impact of the blackout though is really pronounced, especially in the Caldar. The Raven one is really cool. So that does show the impact of the nullsec blackout over the summer. I think on the Take One ships it was pretty damn major. That's gonna be it for this week then, guys. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you all next time.